Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if God calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" On January 23rd, 1956, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. offered to resign as president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA. The MIA had been coordinating the boycott of the Montgomery bus system, a boycott which had started a few days earlier on December 5th, 1955. The boycott was in response to the arrest of Rosa Parks for not standing up from her seat, for not moving to the back of the bus to make way for a white passenger to sit down. After weeks of failed negotiations, the backlash against the boycott started to increase. All three elected officials of Montgomery, the mayor, the city commissioner, the police commissioner, announced that they would now start, quote, "getting tough." No more negotiations, the mayor said, until the bus boycott was called off. Furthermore, they announced that the mayor and two other elected officials had joined the White Citizens Council. The mayor said, "I think every right-thinking white person in Montgomery, in Alabama, and across the South should do the same." The White Citizens Council was a group considered more socially acceptable than the KKK. It drew its members from the upper middle and upper classes and advocated using not just violent intimidation, but also economic and legal pressure to maintain segregation. Within a month, membership in the White Citizens Council doubled. And just a few weeks later, on February 10th, the Montgomery Coliseum drew more than 10,000 people, White Citizen Council members from across Alabama and Mississippi, for what was then billed as the largest segregation rally of the century. All three Montgomery elected officials spoke at the rally. At the time, Montgomery was 40% African American. What does it mean right now to be like the prophet Samuel and to say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening"? What does it mean right now in our own time of rising backlash to racial progress? In our own time of increasing political violence on behalf of white supremacy, to be faithful to God's call on our life? I think the answer has two parts. First, the story of Samuel's early life reminds us of a very important fact about our own lives. In the first chapter of the first book of Samuel, the prophet's mother Hannah brings her infant son to the priest Eli at the temple in Shiloh. Hannah is grateful to have become pregnant after so many years of infertility and after so many years of praying in the temple for a baby. So Hannah brings her new baby to the priest Eli and tells him, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me the petition that I made. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is given to the Lord." You see, Hannah knows the truth about her child, which is the same truth for all of us. We are not our own. We belong to God. That is why in our baptism liturgy, the rubric in the prayer book says that the candidate, and often a baby, is presented to the priest. But there is no rubric that says the priest gives back the baby to the parents, because the action of baptism means that the baby is marked as Christ's own forever. For the same reason, at the end of life, the very last liturgical rite in the funeral service is called the committal. We commit the ashes or the body back to the one to whom we belong, back to God. So the first part of the answer is this: to be faithful to God's call on our life is to accept that our lives belong to God. The purpose of our life is not our own to determine. Not my will, but thy will be done. When Martin Luther King Jr. offered his resignation as the president of the MIA, he realized that because of the increasingly violent backlash to the bus boycott, there was now no possibility of a negotiated settlement. They had passed the point of no return. King wasn't sure he should still lead the group. After all, he had led them to this seemingly hopeless point. Who knew what the future held? But no one took up King's offer of resignation. One of the most respected senior ministers of the MIA told King, who had just turned 27 years old, as his birthday had been a few days earlier, "You are young and well-trained in the Spirit. I will drink my portion of this cup, but you can drink of it deeper." So the second part of the answer is found here. To be faithful to God's call on our life is to be well-trained in the Spirit. Let's not fool ourselves. Without training, without discipline, with just our instincts and our emotions to guide our actions and our activism, we will fail to fulfill our call. As Todd Bolsinger has written, we don't rise to the occasion, we default to our training. For this reason, as the civil rights movement caught fire and started to attract all kinds of people who wanted to volunteer and help, Martin Luther King Jr. developed a rule of life. Everyone who wanted to be part of the movement had to agree to these spiritual practices. Meditate daily on the teachings and life of Jesus. Walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love. Pray daily to be used by God in order that all might be free. Sacrifice personal wishes in order that all might be free. Observe with both friend and foe the ordinary rules of courtesy. Seek to perform regular service for others and the world. Refrain from violence of fist, tongue, or heart. And finally, remember always that the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. And when we are well trained in the Spirit in this way, we can do the work this moment calls us to do. Daryl Johnson is a former analyst for the Department of Homeland Security, and he has been warning for years about the dangers of violent right-wing extremism. In a recent interview, he said, if you've got family members, neighbors, co-workers that are part of these movements, rather than ostracize and debate and criticize and isolate them, we need to love them, to have compassion and to bring them into the mainstream. The only way you're going to get rid of hate is through love. Every person I've known that's been a white supremacist that has left the movement has left through an act of compassion or love. They didn't leave it because someone convinced them that their belief system was wrong. This sounds like almost an impossible task. But when we are well trained in the Spirit, God can work miracles through us, as God did through Martin Luther King Jr. Now, just 7 days after King's offer of resignation was not accepted, on the evening of January 30th, while he was speaking to a couple thousand people at a rally, King learned that his home had been bombed. And it is only when he gets home that he learns his wife and 10-week-old baby daughter are alive and have survived the bombing. The scene outside his house is very tense. There are supporters who want to take revenge. People are brandishing guns and knives and confronting the policemen who have showed up. And King walks out onto the front porch of his bombed-out home. He holds up his hand for silence. Everything's all right, he says. Don't get panicky. Don't do anything panicky. Don't get your weapons. If you have weapons, take them home. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. Remember, that is what Jesus said. We are not advocating violence. We want to love our enemies. I want you to love our enemies. Be good to them. This is what we must live by. We must meet hate with love. I did not start this boycott, he said. I was asked by you to serve as your spokesman. I want it to be known, the length and breadth of this land, that if I am stopped, this movement will not stop. If I am stopped, our work will not stop. For what we are doing is right. What we are doing is just. And God is with us. Amen.